Hello and welcome to Great Britain in Focus. I'm James McCullough.
And I'm Pascal Mary Rakovich. Today we have the privilege of meeting Aidan Mackey, worldwide expert on G.K. Chesterton and founder of the G.K. Chesterton Library.
Aidan speaks to us about the life and work of the famous and well-loved Catholic writer and poet. What comes across is that Chesterton apparently had no enemies because he was so generous to people. So maybe Chesterton speaks to us as much through his personality as through his remarkable writing.
Let's hear how Aidan describes this man whom he so highly esteems.
Hello, I'm in Oxford today at the Oxford Oratory. In fact, I'm sitting in the Oratory Library with a very special guest. Aidan Mackey is a Chestertonian of many, many decades. Aidan, welcome to the show. Aidan, where are you from originally?
I was born and brought up in Manchester, about 2 miles from the city centre, in a rather interesting society, working class but mixed. The people next door owned their own house, and they owned our house and one or two others, and could easily have moved away to a large house, but no, this was where they belonged. And we were mixed. Catholic, Methodist, Church of England, Baptist, and all good neighbours. I knew at the age of 3 I could toddle into any house and get a chocolate biscuit and things like that. And I was one of a large family, but I was only 6 years old when our good father died. So I had to leave school at the age of 14 and start bringing in a few shillings a week. So that was not the limit by any means of my education, but of my actual schooling. So I am not a scholar or an academic, and I came into contact through an older brother with Chesterton in 1936, just before my 14th birthday, and I haven't stopped since. I count myself as being the oldest and the noisiest Chestertonian.
Let's go back to his beginnings. Where was Chesterton born and when was he born?
Chesterton was born in London, in Kensington. He was part of the firm of estate agents and land valuers, Chesterton Company, which is still going, but Gilbert would not approve of it now because it's now big business with branches in Australia and other places and so on. And Chesterton was not in favour of big business. No. And
what sort of family was he born into? What sort of strata of society?
Like C.S. Lewis, he had only one sibling, a brother. Chesterton did indeed have a younger sister, but she died in infancy. And he and his brother Cecil, who was an important part of Chesterton's life, debated and argued endlessly, but never quarrelled. And it was in Kensington that he came to know, in the late 1890s, Frances Blogg, which is a corruption of the French de Blogg, and he married her in 1901.
But before that, Aidan, just tell us a little bit about his schooling and how he got into his eventual line of work.
Yeah, he went to St. Paul's School, and he enjoyed it there. And he formed there a debating club, the Junior Debating Club, and many of the friends remained his friends throughout life.
He left school, where did he go next?
He did not go to university. He went to the Slade School of Art, but they recorded that they taught him very little because his drawing, his artwork was so well formed already, and it's unmistakable. You see one of his characters on a table from yards away. Oh, that's Chesterton.
Did he complete his studies at Slade?
He drifted away rather simply because, as I said, they had little to teach him there, and he got into journalism quite early on. How did he
get into journalism?
Well, he was a friend of one of the Hodder family at school, of the Hodder and Stoughton publishers, famous publishers, who are still going. And he worked in the office of Brimley Johnson, a very small publisher who was also linked with the Chesterton family. And he had a tremendous memory for the books that he'd read. He was reading and giving advice to the management on which books were worth considering publication. And he could remember the plots of them many, many years later. And also would have been published some of his letters to Francis dating from that period.
So he was kind of reading the submissions to the publisher. Was that his role? So how did he transit from that, which is very different to writing and journalism?
Then he started in journalism, writing essays, which attracted a good deal of attention. And his very first book, books of essays, was called The Defendant, and that's still a very fine introduction to Chesterton's works. That he'd only published that and a book of nonsense verse, Greybeards at Play, when, astonishingly, he was asked to do a volume on the poet Robert Browning in the English Men of Letters series, which was an erudite thing written by the Greybeards and great men of the series. And Chesterton had never written a book before. As I say, his book of essays, his book of verse, but never a book. And yet that book, his book on Robert Browning, is the only one of the series that is still reprinted today. All the others are forgotten.
So talk us through a little bit his literary career and how it blossomed and the types of books, the types of literary works he was writing in the Edwardian period and the run-up to the First War.
Yeah, this is another of the amazing things, that the scope of his writings, that his book on St. Francis was acknowledged, his book on St. Thomas Aquinas, the Etienne Guisson, the great Thomistic scholar, said it was the greatest book on St. Thomas Aquinas ever written. And yet how it happened was that it was suggested to him, and he said to Dorothy Collins, his secretary who became as a daughter to Gilbert and Francis, will you go into London and buy a couple of books or so on St. Thomas Aquinas? And she brought them back, 4 or 5 of them, she said, and he browsed through them for a while and then dictated that book. A slim volume, I think it's probably slightly under 200 pages, but still the greatest thing on St. Thomas Aquinas. And then his 2 books on America are still celebrated. But and then he wrote The Outline of Sanity, which was an introduction to distributism. He wrote a number of novels. The Ball and the Cross is well worth reading because it demonstrates very clearly his generosity to his opponents.
Talk to me, Aidan, about the influence of London upon Chesterton. He was a Londoner, he was born in London, he got married in London, his early married life was in London. What was the influence of London at that time on him?
London was a great influence of him because it was a meeting place for so many people. So much went on in London. The man who was tired of London is tired of life. That was Samuel Johnson, wasn't it? And he had many friends, but what was not good for him was that he was within call and he was constantly interrupted because everybody loved his company. And they went, and one day he and Francis decided that they'd take a day out, and they went to the railway station and said, we want to go out in the countryside. So, where do you want to go? Said the booking clerk. Well, is there a train coming? And there was a train going to Beaconsfield. So it was quite by chance that they went actually to Slough and walked across the fields to Beaconsfield. It would not be possible now, but it was then. And they each separately, unknown to the other, fell in love with the place and thought, this is where we should live.
Talk to me a little bit, Aidan, about the legacy of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. By 1936, where was he in the literary scene in terms of his reputation? and then subsequent decades, how that has waxed and waned both in England and in America.
Yes, he was very, very famed, and as I've said before, he had many opponents and no enemies. H.G. Wells, the atheist, was on record of saying, if when I die I get to heaven, if such a place exists, then it will be because I can boast of being a friend of Gilbert Chesterton's. And George Bernard Shaw, when Chesterton died, Bernard Shaw wrote to his widow and said, Gilbert never knew how to handle money. If you're at all short, all I need is figures on a postcard and you'll get it by return. He had great friends like that, and after he died, some years later, the critics tended to abandon him. This is normal with many, if not most, authors. But the public, ordinary people, never stopped reading him. And slowly he grew back into favour, even with the intelligentsia. And now he's quoted constantly all over the place, even on television, which is not conducive to the values of Chestertonian people.
Talk to me today about where do you feel Chesterton's literary legacy is?
His poetry, some of it will certainly survive. There are in the Ignatius Press collection 3 volumes, not far off 800 pages. No, yes, not far 800 pages of his poetry alone. I started that off doing research on his poems at Top Meadow Cottage, and then it was taken over by Professor Dennis Conlon, who completed the 3 great volumes.
So would you say that the abiding legacy is now one of a poet?
No, his thought and his generosity and his ability to write on serious matters with humour.
Aidan, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to EWTN today.
Thank you.
What education are children currently receiving from schools about life relationships? How can children learn how to give and receive in a Christian way? And how can we make the theological depths of our faith accessible in order to nurture the growing mind?
Edmund Adamus is an educational consultant within the Catholic Church who presents a programme of formation for schools, exploring Catholic identity and Christian virtues in the modern world.
This programme of formation seeks to challenge both students and parents to be stronger critical thinkers in the key questions of life. Let's hear what he has to say on these matters.
I'm Claire Mary, and you're joining us from our studios in Walsingham. I want to introduce you and to be in conversation with Edmund Adamus, who is the education consultant for quite an incredible programme which we're going to hear about today, called A Fertile Heart. Perhaps you could begin, Edmund, with telling us where has this come from and what is its purpose and need for today?
Well, thanks for having me, Claire Mary. It's really great to be here, such a blessing. A Fertile Heart, Giving and Receiving Creative Love, which is the full title of the scheme of work, originates from a doctoral thesis that was first submitted and approved way back in 2014, I think it was, by a Birmingham priest who studied in Rome at the time. He later went on to teach moral theology part-time at Oscott Seminary in Birmingham whilst being a busy parish priest. And it was at the time when he was submitting his thesis and a retired Catholic teacher was typing up the script for him and formatting it so it was all very nice and neat and tidy. And as she was reading the thesis, she said to him, "Gosh, I wish I'd got this when I was being educated and doing teacher training." And then she went on to say, but actually our children in our schools, they need to hear some of these messages that you've written about and researched about. And so that was the kind of birth, if you like, or conception, if you like, of the idea that these dense, very complex theological questions and themes that were being discussed in as you can imagine, a very rich doctoral thesis could possibly be opened up to become accessible, not just to teachers, but actually to children in our schools from primary through to upper secondary.
If I was in year 4 now, entering into my first class, say, of the 10 per year, what would I be beginning with in this curriculum?
Oh, well, at the very beginning, it really does start with some basic concepts, which they probably would have begun to explore already in early years and what have you, which is, well, you know, understanding who you are, who's your family, who are your immediate family, who are your friends. If I come from a Christian family or I'm in a Catholic school, and particularly, you know, I've been baptized, I belong to the family of the church. So it kind of explores all the wider relationships around us, so that it begins to give the child some context of the themes we then want to explore later on as they move through the scheme. And I think it's quite early on actually in year 4 and 5 where we do talk quite a lot about forgiveness. And you know, what does that look like in your everyday life? You know, and it might be basic things like, you know, your friends not sharing their sweets or whatever, or being a bit greedy, or the temptation to be mean to another child or something like that, which is, you know, it's just normal everyday human interaction. But exploring, putting wrongs right through forgiveness and reconciliation, and linking that with the sacramental life of the church. Now, there's nothing new in taking a holistic approach to relationships and sex education. In some respects, Catholic schools have been striving to do this all along for many, many years, and have, in some respects, have done a pretty good job. But of course, what we're saying is that this is a moment perhaps to go deeper than the superficial, and to take young people on a much longer journey. I mean, if we're honest, up until now, even when the RSC provision in some schools was of a good quality, it was something that was tagged along at the end of the last term of the summer term. Not to say that that was a necessarily bad thing, but it wasn't something that maybe happened throughout the course of a year in an explicit way. Whereas now, schools have got to do something quite regular, if not weekly, then certainly, you know, a few times a term throughout the whole of the year. And we've structured the Fertile Heart in such a way so that from year 4, which is age 8, right through to year 11, 10 modules a year. We call them modules, not lessons. So it feels a little bit more advanced, if I can put it that way, a bit more challenging. And it is, the material is quite challenging intellectually. We make no apologies for the way it stretches people, young people. And we estimate that 10 lessons a year spread over across of, you know, several years from year 4 up to year 11, if you're lucky and there's a continuity between what a child gets in primary school and in the high school, that at the end of that process you should have explored these themes through a good, sound theological and Christian anthropological lens that would maybe just equip you a bit more, a bit better intellectually and emotionally, so that as a young person goes from childhood through adolescence to almost young adulthood at the age of 16 going into sixth form, they are maybe perhaps stronger critical thinkers about the culture around them and about who they are and what they want to achieve in life than they would otherwise have been. And this idea of, well, how fertile is my heart? And it's not just about, you know, physiological fertility, which is an important aspect of our understanding our place in the world, and in the understanding of, you know, appreciation of authentic sexuality, but a fertile heart, to be fertile in your spirit, to be spiritually fruitful
Yes.
is the calling of all of us, whether we end up being married and having a family, or we end up in single or religious life or consecrated life, or whatever we end up doing in life. The call to be fruitful and to embrace that's your call to holiness is to be fertile in the eyes of God, isn't it? So I suppose it's providing teachers and students together with a different lens to look at these everyday questions and problems and challenges.
Now, isn't that wonderfully
So
enriching? I often think about the generations coming together with this
absolutely.
fertile heart.
Yeah,
you know, it
absolutely.
is from, if you look at the Catholic way of looking at a whole person and whole generations, it's from conception to the end of life.
Yeah.
So it's this whole journey together, bringing the generations together in a way, which is a beautiful thing to be able to journey together on.
Totally. As I said to it earlier, is that this isn't just something that we think is extremely useful and helpful for schools and educators, but will be equally beneficial for parents and families to use at home, particularly the online materials, because you don't have to be a teacher or even to have studied any kind of theology in any depth to appreciate the quality of the materials and the themes that they explore, because it's just exploring human living, you know, ordinary everyday human living.
Which we all have the experience of.
Absolutely, and relationships. What do we mean by relating and relationships?
Yes.
This is part and parcel of everybody's experience, whoever you are, wherever you come from, whatever your background is, whether you have faith or not at all or whatever. But I think we all know, and as Christians, of course, we can be unashamedly truthful about what we believe, and we believe that everyone has capax Dei, the capacity for God. Whether they know it or not is in God's hands, isn't it? But we as agents of that message through vehicles like Fertile Heart, and I hope, my hope is that Fertile Heart at least gives people, educators and students and pupils between themselves and children and parents, some ideas to digest and have those conversations with the phones off and the devices closed around, you know, the big questions of life. What you know, what is the pursuit of happiness? What kind of choices must I make to begin to feel fulfilled, and to feel that, you know, I have a place in this world, I have a calling to answer. And if the Fertile Heart can help people explore those with a little bit more vigour, a little bit more rigour and dynamism, then that would be a tremendous prayer answered, I think.
Well, it's profound because of the whole package that you are offering to schools, but to families as well.
Absolutely.
And it seems like this is a very good start. And if somebody doesn't know anything about this, what are you going to leave them with? I mean, what would be the 3 things that you want to leave somebody with that excites them and wants them to grab this off the shelf and make that part of their school or their family life?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, the first thing, the easiest thing to do is simply go to the website, which is, you know, fertileheart.org.uk. You know, it's all there. It's very easy to navigate and very informative. And unlike many websites, we're refreshing it all the time. So it's always worth visiting and revisiting, you know, a good few times a month, because there's always new material up there. So that's the first thing. The other thing I would say is to, if you're, as a parent or teacher, you really want to get into this a little bit more detail, but you can't commit, as it were, to, you know, a sizable cost for the material, either for your school or for yourself as a family, then you can very simply purchase a set of sample books, if you want to, and that's easily done, again, online or even on the website. We've set it up so that it's very easy to go on the site, and you can actually, you know, click on the kind of icon of the book, and it's all very clever these days, isn't it? You click on the page, and the page will turn electronically, so you can actually view what's actually in the books, the teacher manuals and the student books, online, and then there are some sample lessons, online resources there as well. So you can go into a year 4 or a year 6 module and click on the online resources, and it will show you what the PowerPoint slide looks like, or suite of slides look like for that particular lesson, what the teacher guidance notes look like. So there's quite a number of avenues you can explore to give you a better feel for what's in the books or what's in the course, but also what we're about as an overall project as well.
Oh, it's been so wonderful to have you with us, Edmund.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to have a fertile heart in my mind for some time to come, because it's so like the fiat that we're all called to unite with Our Lady here
Absolutely.
in Walsingham, what that means for each one of our vocations and each one of our lives. So thank you so much for being with us.
And the project entirely under her protection and care.
That's wonderful.
Thanks.
God bless you.
Thank you, Claire Mary. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Full versions of these interviews will be made available on our social media channels.
If you'd like to support the work of EWTN Great Britain, do visit our website ewtn.co.uk.
Until next time, goodbye and God bless.